RPG. Thank you for that awesome intro. How y'all doing today? All right. This is an awesome stage. I love this venue. It's so cool. They just keep getting bigger and bigger. Like 20 years ago, I did a conference, and it would be at a state park, and it'd be windy, and there'd be 10 people there. I could never imagine this. So, anyway, today I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the history of the skunk ape, since we are right here in Florida. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my own research area down in Boggy Creek. Anybody ever heard of the legend of Boggy Creek? That's right. I ask that anywhere I go, and there's always somebody who knows that. And of course, any Bigfoot conference have multiple hands. And I can't tell you how many people over the years have come up to my table and said, "Oh man, that movie scared the blank out of me." I think I had 5 people already today. I said, "Well, me too, I was one of those kids." But anyway, so I'm titling my presentation, Rise of the Planet of the Skunk Apes. Just because I thought that would be kind of cool. I'm sure everybody here is a fan of the Planet of the Apes movies. That was also integral to my existence when I was a kid. Horror movies, cryptids, and Planet of the Apes. So that's probably why I'm here today, from all those great things. Let me see if the clicker works. So being here in Florida, you gotta talk about the allure of the swamps. And it just seems that is a place where mysteries would flourish, right? And you know that because every time I watched Scooby-Doo as a kid, the haunted house was right next to a swamp, and there was a mystery to solve. So swamps just had an allure for me, especially as a kid, having seen that sort of stuff in Tarzan movies, and I had seen swamps in horror movies. But I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, which is incidentally why I wear a cowboy hat, because I've been wearing this hat, I guess, since I was born, which is pretty much true. But I had never actually seen a swamp. I had never been to a swamp. I didn't even realize there were swamps in East Texas, where we border Louisiana, the Bayou State, right? But when I was young, my family went on an adventure. We were going to go to Disney World, and we came down here to Florida. We took an RV, and we went to a place called Silver Springs. And there was a swamp, cypress trees, the Spanish moss hanging down. I was like, wow, this is super cool. This is just like in a movie. I looked for the haunted house, but I didn't see one. I looked for creatures. They had alligators, and I think I got a picture holding a snake and an alligator and whatever else they could, charge you for taking a picture. But there was always some allure. And so, of course, when I started doing Bigfoot research, one of my favorite places was the Boggy Creek area, which is very, very swampy, which is a little closer to my home in Fort Worth than Florida. But of course, it wasn't long before I started doing a lot of research and kind of looking into the parallels between the swamplands of Florida and others around and what might be sighted there. And so here in these swampy lands of Florida, some of the first sightings dated back many years. And in 1957, some hunters went into the area of the Big Cypress Preserve, which is down just a little bit west of the Everglades. And they were out there, and they'd been hunting all day, and they had a good day of hunting. And this group decided they were going to camp overnight, so they strung some hammocks between some trees. They started a fire. They got up in there. Well, it was around midnight. They had been asleep for a while when they heard something rustling around, some heavy footsteps, something walking up close to the camp. And they kind of looked up, expecting to see some kind of wildlife. And what they saw was something standing upright on two legs. It was large. First, they thought it was a Seminole Indian, because they were still in those areas, and they thought it's probably one of them. But as it got closer, got within 30 feet, they could see that this wasn't a person. This was some kind of thing. It looked ape-like. It stood upright. It was large. It had a conical sort of head. And so these hunters were frightened. They didn't know what this thing was. So they got out of those hammocks and grabbed their guns.
Oh my God.
They sat with their bed. But what they didn't know is strange tales were already circulating down here in Florida. Tales of some sort of creature that walked upright. It was covered in hair. Looked like a cross between a human and an ape. And it was kind of a nameless creature, something that the Native Americans of this area had talked about. And they said it's something that has been here for a long time. Something that lives out in the swamplands, in the woods. We leave it alone. It's something that exists somewhere between legend and reality. And so as the years went on, these tales began to take shape. And in the 1960s, there began to be reports of this creature that were more well known, reports that were documented. John Keel wrote about one of these, which occurred in 1966 in an area called Hollapaw, which is southeast of Orlando. And in this case, there was some ranchers and farmers out there that began to see a creature that walked upright. Looked kind of like an ape, but they weren't sure what it is. And one of them got close enough to it and said that it looked like an ape, but it wasn't an ape. And you gotta think 1966, this was even before the Patterson-Gimlin film. Now the term Bigfoot had been coined, but that was out in California. That was so far away. Just think of how far the Pacific Northwest is from Florida. Nobody here thought about Bigfoot. So oftentimes, as it is, they would write about these incidents, or they would make the newspaper, and the journalists would give it a name. And in this case, they called it the Hollapaw gorilla.
Uh-huh.
And for a couple of years, there were sightings. And there was a case where allegedly some hunters were out there, were attacked by this thing. They tried to shoot at it. It ran off, limping into the woods, letting loose a blood-curdling howl. They still weren't sure what this thing was, so again, they would just call it things like the Hollapaw gorilla. But this was the early part of what would become known as the skunk ape, what will become more